Good morning. I'm Nicola Barrett, Chief Corporate Learning Officer at Emory Executive Education at Goizueta Business School, and it's great to have you join us today for Business Over Breakfast. Everyone intuitively knows that different customers want different things. Segmenting customers enables businesses to identify and then target their highest value customers, optimizing product offerings, pricing strategies to cater for their unique needs. And in doing so, enhance customer satisfaction and loyalty and maximize revenue and profitability. However, as businesses grow and target more sets of customers, problems can arise. This morning, we have Professor Ryan Hamilton with us to share his ideas from his about-to-be-published book called The Growth Dilemma: Managing Your Brand When Different Customers Want Different Things, that he co-authored with Annie Wilson. Ryan holds a PhD in marketing from the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University. He is a consumer psychologist whose research investigates shopper decision-making, and in particular, he's interested in how brands, prices, and choices influence decision-making at the point of purchase. It's probably very, very interesting right at the moment. Anyway, his research has been published in some of the top academic journals in marketing and management, and he's also been featured in the business press, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, CNN Headline News, Financial Times, Harvard Business Review, just to name a few. He teaches in both Goizueta's degree programs and in executive education, and co-hosts a podcast called The Intuitive Customer, which applies the insights from consumer psychology to effectively manage customer experiences. As with all our webinars, Ryan's going to spend about 35 minutes sharing some of his insights. And so throughout the session, please post your questions in the Q&A box, and I'll get to as many of those as I can, or in the chat. But before I hand over to Ryan, do as I normally do at this time, just let you know about a few of the upcoming courses that we have in executive education. We've got the virtual executive coaching diploma program coming up starting in July. So if you're interested in exploring coaching, executive coaching, please check that out. And for those interested in marketing, and doing a deeper dive into marketing, we're offering the opportunity to participate in several full university credits. So for Emory credit courses, learning alongside the executive MBAs and the evening MBAs, specifically in consumer behavior, product and brand management, AI and marketing, and also marketing analytics. So if you're a marketer or you would like to become a marketer and you wanted to really do a deeper dive into any of those topics, please check those out. And someone's going to put the links to those into the chat. So Ryan, over to you.
Thank you very much. Let me share my screen. So it is a real pleasure to get to talk to you today. I really appreciate this chance. We're going to talk, as Nicholas said, about the difficulty in managing multiple customer segments, different groups of customers, especially as we grow as a brand, as a firm. As she mentioned, this is a topic that I wrote a book about that should be coming out in just under a month at this point. The genesis of this book has been kind of a long time in coming. If you had to endure me as a teacher for marketing core, you may remember me telling you that during the core, we're just going to focus on what happens when you target one group of customers, because that's hard enough for one semester worth of coursework. Let's pretend you've only got one customer segment, and we're going to really focus on how to make that group of customers happy, how to position your offering, what to do with your brand, and so on. But I warned you, like, you can replicate this when you have more than one customer segment. It just gets more complicated. I was kind of expecting that to be addressed in other electives and other classes, like what happens when you grow beyond one segment. And I realized it's not. And in fact, there's hardly anything out there about how to manage multiple customer segments. And so I got together with my very good friend, Annie Wilson, and we decided to tackle this in a book. And here's the book. And so I'm going to tell you some of the topics that we cover in the book and why it's important to consider how you can and should manage multiple segments. What are the dangers there? What are the opportunities? So let me start with a mini case study. Let me tell you an example here. So Land's End, you may be familiar with. It's a company that sells, I would call it kind of comfortable clothing. So a lot of kind of casual, laid back, chunky knit sweaters, a lot of flannel, comfortable chinos. So fine company, does a lot of sales in catalogs, very big in back to school, very popular back to school spot. And they were doing fine. But like all companies, they wanted to grow. And so in the mid 2000 teens, they hired in a new CEO who would come in and shake things up and chart them on a new trajectory towards growth. And so they hired this one who was the former US head at Dolce& and Gabbana. I assume she swept into the office in an immaculately tailored suit. Like I assume that she sleeps in an immaculately tailored suit. Very, very high fashion person and knew that industry very well. And so part of her vision for Land's End was to move it upscale. And so we've got this group of customers who are currently being served by this set of offerings. But if we want to grow, we often want to add more customers to that. So let's keep that group there, but let's pull in some people with somewhat higher taste profiles, willing to spend a little bit more money, and that will grow our customer base and set us on chart us on a course towards more profitability, more growth. And so part of what she pushed was this new line, Canvas by Land's End. And you can see this is not typical Land's End. And so it was a much more high fashion line, kind of party dresses, evening dresses. They had there was a pink cocktail jumpsuit that they sold. They would sell evening blazers for like $600. You can see that they had some stiletto heels that were added to the line. This is a very big departure for Land's End. But again, the plan was we still sell the chunky cable knit sweaters, but we're going to expand now by offering this new group of customers this new set of offerings, and growth will happen. Growth did not happen. So here's kind of conceptually what was going on, what they were aiming for, and where it went wrong. Land's End was serving a segment that I'll call the casual suburban parent, right? So buying clothes for themselves, for their kids, and this was the aesthetic and the vibe. They were aiming for this fashionista segment. It's not clear that they ever got there with that fashionista segment. But once you target multiple segments, it's not enough to make both of them happy. Now you also need to worry about how they interact with each other. So is the fact that the fashionista segment, if it emerges, the fact that it's there buying Land's End, does that change the brand in some way? Does that make it more or less appealing to their current customer base? I don't know that they ever got the fashion segment. I don't think they were successful in pulling that group in any significant numbers. But even if they had been, let's assume that they did. Let's assume that this canvas line was successful. Even then, I would argue this was a flawed business plan. So the problem is that these two groups of customers want fundamentally different things in the clothing that they buy. They want different materials, different cuts, different fashion, and the brand should communicate something that appeals to both of them simultaneously. And that's really hard to do when the tastes are as divergent as they did. So in the process of Land's End trying to make itself more appealing to this new group, including the product lines that I showed you, but they also changed some of their branding, became a little edgier, a little bit more political. In the process of doing that, they ended up turning off some of their loyal customers who said, this isn't the Land's End I know. This isn't what I want anymore. And so instead of growing profitably, Land's End went from making about $9 million in profit before these changes to losing money, losing 7.5 million in less than a year. Like this was just a massive drop off. And the CEO didn't last very long because of it. This is what we want to talk about, right? So your brand can successfully serve one segment. It could hypothetically even successfully serve two segments. But what happens when you try to serve them both simultaneously? And now there's an additional layer of complexity, which means you need to manage the relationship between the customer segments, not just between your brand and each segment individually. And that's what the book's about. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So the growth dilemma, in its broadest terms, is the idea that as brands grow, they gain new customers. That's almost always what growth means. These customers, by definition, if they're in different segments, they want different things. And so you now need to carefully manage those relationships between the customer segments so that they don't fall into conflict, so that you don't end up in a position like Land's End was, where in the process of trying to grow, you end up actually pushing away some of your current customers. This, by the way, not a new or an unusual problem. Kohl's was recently in the news for doing something very similar. Kohl's, kind of a discount clothing retailer, they wanted to attract more upscale customers, so they pulled some of their store brand stuff off the shelves and gave that space to more upscale brands like Babies R Us and their customers didn't want that. They didn't want, and so in the process of trying to attract new customers, they ended up pushing out their current customers, lost money. They've been through three CEOs in the last 2 years. J.C. Penney, if you remember what they went through several years ago, same story. They were trying to attract a new group of customers. So this is a perennial problem. This happens all the time to brands of all sorts. This is what we want to figure out. This is what we want to fix. All right. So part of the story here is that when you pull customers together who want different things, it can result in conflict. It doesn't always have to. I'll talk at the very end about some of the ways that we can avoid conflict altogether. But it can result in conflict. And so we're going to talk about four different types of conflict and then what we can do about it. So one type of conflict is functional conflict. This is just where you and I are both buying from the brand and we just want different things from the brand. So you want blue, I want red. For whatever reason, the brand can't make both. So it has to make a choice. And one of us is going to be dissatisfied by the choice that it makes. Sun Chips many years ago decided that they wanted to have more environmentally friendly packaging, so they made this bag that was compostable, uh, which was this great innovation. And some of their more environmentally minded customers, that segment, really loved it. They were like, "This is a great thing that we can do." But not everyone who liked Sun Chips was there because of the brand's environmental bona fides. Some of them just like the taste of the chips. And so the problem with this compostable bag is that it was really loud, which sounds like a petty problem. It was really loud. Like when it would crinkle, it was like jet engine level crinkles or lawnmower level noises. It was really loud. Now, the environmental segment mostly didn't care. This was a nice thing. They were willing to endure a little bit of really loud crinkling from the bag. That was fine. This other segment, though, who cared more about the taste of the chip than the environmental credibility, they were really turned off by this. It became kind of a big thing, and they eventually had to pull the bag. So they just wanted different functional things from the bag. And some of their customers were very happy with it, and some of them weren't. One of those two groups or the other was going to be dissatisfied by the choice that they made. So this is functional conflict. Another example of functional conflict is one that Walt Disney World is dealing with and has been for the last several years. One of their major segments is families with young kids. Like that's kind of what Disneyland was designed for. And it served that segment very, very well over the decades. But there's been this recent trend towards Disney adults who are coming to the park. And I was shocked to learn it is not a small number of people. Somewhere between 40 and 50% of all park visitors are coming to the park without children. So this is a major segment now for Disney. And the problem is that functionally, like, look, everybody's going for the rides and for Mickey. They have a large overlapping value set. But adults want a fundamentally different experience than families with young kids do. They want more sophisticated food options. They want more kind of upscale experiences, nicer hotels, so on. And one of the major changes that they want is alcohol. So when Walt Disney founded Disneyland, that was one of his founding principles is no alcohol. Invites in a bad element. when 50% of your customer base is adults looking for an adult experience, Disney has had to change that. Now, it doesn't always cause conflict, but it can. This is hilarious to me, but people have started selling temporary tattoos that you can put on your arm so that when you go to Epcot Center and go around the pond there and visit all the different national centers, you can check off, turn it into a pub crawl essentially, and you can check off having drunk alcohol of different varieties from all of these different locations. That's a lot of drinking on that arm. And it means that people have been, drinking too much sometimes at Disney, throwing up in the bushes. And so it's a conflict in terms of how is that space to be used? Is it an adult space? Is it a space just for families with children? How can we make it both? Disney's done an okay job, but it's a continuing source of potential conflict for them. So that's one. Functional conflict is one type of conflict. Another is what we call brand image conflict. This is the idea that when a brand is serving multiple segments, by serving those segments, it can start to change the meaning of the brand. I think Land's End suffered from some brand image conflict. It no longer felt like the traditional Brand's End to its core customers. Weight Watchers dealt with some of this. So Weight Watchers has been around for decades, and they served this segment of people who wanted to lose weight. That was, if you wanted to lose weight, Weight Watchers was your partner for that. As people's feelings towards weight loss and towards health have evolved over the years, there's been another segment. That segment still exists. There's still a segment that is just laser focused on wanting to lose weight. There are other segments, though, that are more holistic in their thinking, more kind of wellness, more kind of relationship with food, that kind of thing. And so, Weight Watchers are like, well, that's a large segment. We would like some of that business as well. So can we expand the meaning of our brand to be both weight watching, losing weight, and also kind of more holistic wellness thinking? And so they rebranded as a part of that effort, went from Weight Watchers to WW, which is a name that is shorter, but somehow still has more syllables and takes longer to say. And the idea is that we're not just about losing weight, we're about wellness more generally. And in the process of trying to make their brand more acceptable to this new segment that they were trying to attract, it eroded the meaning of the brand. Weight Watchers was now seen as being less of a reliable weight loss partner, and it was not clear what they stood for as much anymore. So they ended up driving away some of their traditional customers in the process of seeking new ones because the brand became less meaningful. Tiffany also ran into a similar problem. There's a period in the late 90s, early 2000s when Tiffany started selling um, silver jewelry in large numbers. And this was quite a bit less expensive than Tiffany's typical jewelry. And it became very popular among teenagers. So this was something that like teenage sweethearts would buy for each other, and sometimes have it engraved. So these Tiffany necklaces became very, very popular, and they were making Tiffany a lot of money. So that it was a cheaper bracelet and necklace than a lot of Tiffany stuff. It was still not cheap. And so Tiffany was doing very well by this. But they eventually scaled back dramatically on this. They made these more expensive and kind of harder to buy. They wouldn't sell them in their main Tiffany store. They would have kind of a side entrance for buying the cheaper silver jewelry. And the reason was they were worried about brand image conflict. So this is a quote from the CEO at the time. Large number of silver customers did represent a fundamental threat, not just to the business, but to the core franchise of our brand. Does Tiffany mean the same thing that it has always meant if it is now being sold in large numbers to teenagers, right? So here we've got the two segments, we've got the brand, and because it's selling to teenagers, are people going to think about Tiffany in the same way that they always had? The CEO, I think, wisely identified that was a potential conflict source, and so they de-emphasized the teenagers and tried to make sure the brand was still upscale. This also is a very common scenario for luxury brands. A lot of times they'll want to move a little bit downscale, get some of those customers who are willing to, who can't afford to buy the full price stuff. But there's that that risk that they're going to drag the brand down to be something less exclusive, less special, and less able to command premium prices among their original core customers as a result. So we've got functional conflict, we've got brand image conflict, user identity conflict is the third one that we identify and that we talk about. This is closely aligned with brand image conflict. In fact, they happen a lot together, but it is distinct enough that we wanted to separate it out and talk about it differently. User identity conflict arises from the idea that people use brands sometimes to signal membership in a community. So if I use this particular brand, I'm this type of person, right? And if you use this type of brand, you're that type of person. When brands extend into new customer domains and start attracting new customers, sometimes that can erode the value of a brand as a signal of membership in a community or subculture. So, for example, Supreme started off as a skateboarder brand, and it was a hardcore skateboarder brand. Some of their retail stores, when they only had a few of them, would have a bowl or a half pipe in the store, so people could come and skate in the store, and it was seen as a mark of legitimacy. Over time, the brand expanded into attracting a fashion segment as well. So became a streetwear brand. And the fact that they had these skateboarders who were fans of the brand gave it authenticity. It really, this fashion segment really appreciated the fact that actual real skateboarders in that community loved the brand. And so they wanted to like participate in that authenticity as well. So it went from skateboarder brand to skateboarder brand plus fashion brand, streetwear brand. But in the process, they leaned a little bit too hard into streetwear and they started partnering with luxury brands. They partnered with Louis Vuitton and Rimowa luxury luggage, started selling some weird stuff like branded bricks. And in the process of doing that, they started to drive off some of those skaters who felt like this no longer signals that we are real committed skateboarders, and instead it's signaling just like a bunch of posers are also buying this brand. This is a comment that we found from a student newspaper at UC Santa Barbara, where this guy wrote in and said, "Supreme is not a skate brand. Supreme will never again be a skate brand. Supreme has turned into the very thing it once was against, mainstream, and any attempt to deny or obfuscate it is nothing more than a marketing ploy." Ouch. Like if your credibility as a brand depends on um, a follower of skaters, that lends authenticity to your brand, this is like five alarm fire right here. And in the last couple of years, Supreme has been down tens of millions of dollars in revenue from where they were, in part because of this. They are just no longer seen as a skateboard. There was utility conflict that drove away some of their core customers. Another example of this that I actually find bizarre and kind of funny, uh, Burberry had this core group of customers for decades. Burberry was Burberry trench coats were worn by Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall and Audrey Hepburn. It was just this sophisticated upscale brand, kind of old world luxury, and that's who they'd been serving for forever. For some bizarre reason, in the early 2000s, um, Burberry became popular among soccer hooligans in the UK. That people started referring to the Burberry pattern as the chav check. Like it was people wearing Burberry tracksuits and caps would be getting into fistfights on the streets after soccer games. Bars and clubs started banning anyone wearing Burberry from coming in. Like it was a problem. Now, Burberry didn't seek out that segment. That was gifted to them by fate. They didn't choose this, but it generated user conflict, user identity conflict. The traditional customer was not excited about being tied to this rowdy group of soccer fans through the brand. And so there was a real risk of turning off that core segment. Burberry took some pretty drastic actions to eliminate that. I'll talk about that in a second. But this is user identity conflict. One group of people didn't want to be associated with another group of people through the brand. So this is what Burberry did. They eliminated a bunch of the products that were most popular with the soccer hooligan group. They raised prices. They eliminated some distribution outlets. They really recognized the threat that this was to the brand and tried to get rid of that segment. So the fourth source of conflict. So we've got functional, brand image, user identity. The fourth one is ideological. So this is where different segments have different fundamental values, just different ideologies, and those can come into conflict through a brand. As brands go more multinational and global, there are more opportunities for these types of conflict. So, for example, the NBA is an international brand, has fans all over the world. During the Hong Kong uprising, in the late 2000 teens. One of the NBA's employees, this is the general manager of the Houston Rockets, posted a tweet in support of Hong Kong, and in support of pushing back against the mainstream Chinese or the mainland Chinese government. For a lot of Americans, this was like not a controversial position to take. I think a lot of Americans had more sympathy towards the Hong Kong protesters. But the NBA estimates they have about 500 million fans in China. And they were on a different side of this ideological divide and were very offended by this tweet. And it kind of blew up and became a big deal. Reporters started asking people about it. And that led to some people taking a position that was more neutral or maybe on the other side. Among them, LeBron James, who said that the GM, the Houston Rockets, was misinformed and wasn't educated on the situation. That then led to people who were in support of Hong Kong being very angry on the other side, that LeBron James would say that. And so by kind of having these prominent employees take a position on an ideologically fraught issue, it pulled the brand into that. And now people on both sides were upset that the brand seemed to be aligned with one side or the other. A insane example of this happened when M&M's redesigned their spokes candy, mostly by giving them new shoes. The biggest change was the green M&M. She went from go-go boots to sensible sneakers. Brands do this all the time. I'm sure that nobody anticipated anything would come of it. It somehow became a thing. Tucker Carlson went on his show and said, "Bet you didn't know M&Ms were pushing intolerance, but they were. M&Ms will not be satisfied until every last cartoon character is deeply unappealing and totally androgynous, until the moment you wouldn't want to have a drink with any of them. That's the goal. When you're totally turned off, we've achieved equity, they've won." So this was a hot take nobody saw coming, but it pulled the candy into this space where people on multiple sides of what became an ideological issue caused problems. And M&M's they decided to pull the spokes candies entirely and hire a human, Maya Rudolph, to be their spokesperson for a while. It became an ideological thing. Brands sometimes step into this deliberately, sometimes accidentally, and sometimes in ways that they couldn't possibly anticipate happening. But it happens, and it happens more frequently. And so these types of conflicts are things that brands need to be aware of. All right, that's the problem. What's the solution? Well, there are three basic steps that brands can take. We call them fences, ladders, and planks. So fences happen when you deliberately try to keep segments apart. So we're going to serve multiple segments here, but we're going to try to carve out independent spaces, either physically, literal spaces, or more often kind of symbolic spaces where these segments will be less likely to rub up against each other and cause problems. The best in the business at this for a long time was Nike. So Nike, largest athletic shoe and clothing and apparel brand in the world by a huge margin. And they served all of these different communities, and they served them all really well. So if you were a basketball enthusiast who wore Nike, you kind of felt like Nike was a basketball brand. And if you were a runner who used Nike, you kind of felt like Nike was a running brand. And if you were sneakerhead, a fashionista who liked Nike. Like Nike was very good at carving out those spaces within the brand so that people felt like it was their community. And so they had different Facebook groups that were managed and aligned with these brands. They had different spokespeople associated with each sport community. They had different digital offerings. And so they were very, very good at creating these gated communities within Nike where people felt like they had the space. Several years ago, they got a new CEO who among other changes, decided to essentially tear down all these fences. So they fired a bunch of sport-specific experts. They decided we're not going to have divisions by sport. Instead, we're going to have divisions of men's, women's, and children's, because that's the way apparel brands are organized. The CEO did other things also, but tearing down these fences was just a terrible move. And they've since fired that CEO, and the new guy who came in reintroduced these sports communities. I think they realized that those efforts were actually really valuable to give the space for each of these. It's been shocking to me to see the rise of all of these running shoe brands that have taken off in the last few years. And I think some of that is because Nike dropped the ball on this, where Nike had this space for Nike runners, and it felt like Nike was the dominant brand in running. And if you really cared about running, then you'd be using Nike products because they were the best. And Nike was seen as, and when they took that away, tore down those fences, Nike became kind of a sports brand instead of a running brand. And it provided oxygen for a lot of these smaller running brands to really step forward. And people who cared about running now decided that some of these other brands would better serve their interests rather than a Nike that wasn't as focused on them. So can you separate those out? Timberland serves both a fashion segment and a work segment. They run different Instagram accounts for those two different segments. They have overlapping but different product lines to serve those. They have kind of a different communication vibe when they talk to these different segments. They've created space to separate those out. Starbucks serves a lot of segments. Two of them, though, are in danger of conflict. So when Starbucks first launched, it was the fanciest coffee you could buy. And so early days of Starbucks, they attracted a lot of what we call coffee sophisticates, people who take coffee very seriously and wanted a high quality cup of coffee. Over time, Starbucks kind of lost that group in part because they made Starbucks more attractive to other segments, among them one that we call Starbies, which are people who use Starbucks as kind of a badge brand. They like to be seen carrying the cup around. They have these signature drinks that they create for themselves, which is kind of like my own personal drink and my own personal brand. And this created several different kinds of conflict because the associate, or, among them, the sophisticates didn't want to be associated with these people who were drinking coffee flavored milkshakes under the same brand. It eroded Starbucks' credibility as a high quality coffee producer. It created associations that this group didn't want. So they've largely lost most of the sophisticates. They've gone to other smaller chains, places that they feel is a little bit less mainstream. Starbucks, though, has indicated that they want them back. And so part of what they've done is create fences between them. One of which I think is very clever, is they've created a sub-brand called Starbucks Reserve, where they've created a series of coffee shops that are different from the typical Starbucks. One of the really interesting ways they're different is they are deliberately out of the way. They are not a convenient place to get coffee. You have to go there because you want to go there. Right? And inside, you can see how they look different from other Starbucks. The baristas who work there are specialty baristas. They call them coffee masters. They have to get additional training. They wear black aprons instead of the green ones to signal their expertise. And they will make the coffee right there in front of you and talk you through it. They'll use all these, onological terms about the nuttiness of this type of coffee or the fruitiness of that one. They offer specialty drinks you can only get there. They have certain types of drinks on tap. You can buy fancy coffee making gear to make it at home because you're super into coffee and that's important to you. They have this passport, what they call it, so you can try different coffees from different places in the world and keep track of what you like. All of these are an effort to carve out and create a separate space, make a fence so that they can serve those sophisticates in a different way than they serve the Starbies and some of their other segments. So that's fences. Ladders is a similar idea, except now there's a hierarchy. So we're going to separate these customers out, and we're going to do it in such that we're going to privilege one group because both groups benefit from one group being put higher on the ladder. So Carhartt is a work brand. They make work clothing and they always have. It has become a fashion brand, though, in recent years. But Carhartt has never lost focus. So they privilege their work segment above their fashion segment because they don't want to fall into the same trap that Supreme did. And so even they have this separate line, work in progress, which is more of their fashion line, but that's not like fast fashion. You could wear a work in progress Carhartt clothing to go out and work in the mines, and it would still perform well as workwear because they've created this hierarchy where their brand privileges blue collar workers. We make work clothes. If you want to wear it on the street, that's fine too. We're not going to object to that, but we know who we are and we privilege that group. So they've put them higher on the ladder, and that reduces conflict. The blue collar workers never feel like they're being slighted. The fashion segment actually appreciates that it has this authenticity, this credibility of being real work clothes. That's part of the appeal of the brand. And so that reduces conflict. The last one we call planks, which I love. This is a recent addition to this conceptual framework. Sometimes you have to fire the customer. You have to make them walk the plank, right? So we've already seen examples of that. Burberry fired a customer. This was an easy choice for Burberry. They never wanted these customers in the first place. But sometimes it's a harder choice. So when Nike decided to work with Colin Kaepernick, it was after Kaepernick had retired. He was already 2 years out of the NFL, and Nike pulled him back in as a spokesperson, knowing he would be a lightning rod. He was an outspoken advocate of social justice, and there were people who loved him for it, and there were people who did not like his message or the way that he delivered it. And Nike chose him, knowing this would create conflict, in part because they decided there were certain segments that they wanted to encourage to love the brand, and there were others that they were willing to let go. So I love this quote. This is from a marketing executive. He said, "You're not boycotting Nike. They fired you as a customer." So Nike asked these customers to walk the plank by doing something they knew they wouldn't like. Patagonia is another example of this. Patagonia has a long pedigree of being a environmentally friendly brand that people love. It became very popular, though, among finance people and tech people because they would buy these vests in bulk, companies would, and then they'd have their logo embroidered on it. These are all from an Instagram account called Manhattan Uniform. It's worth spending 20 minutes on there. It's really great. They just capture all these pictures of these people coming out of finance and tech companies all wearing their matching, mostly Patagonia clothing. So this became a problem because these are not aligned with the values of the Patagonia brand, right? This was even sent up in HBO Silicon Valley. So Patagonia made the difficult decision to close down that division that worked with companies to embroider logos on their clothing. This was a lot of money for them, and they said it's eroding our brand image. It's undercutting our ability to reasonably claim that we are an environmental company, environmentally friendly company. So they made that segment walk the plank. They got rid of them so that they could focus on their core customer and reduce those conflicts. Last thing I'll say, it's been kind of doom and gloom. There's a lot of risk of conflict, and there's a lot of risk of conflict. We need to be very cautious about this. I've given you some tools for dealing with it. But in the book, we organize it around this framework where you can see three of the relationship types between segments are a different color. I've just talked about the incompatible segments. That's where the conflict is, and I talked about it in part because that's fun. It's more fun to talk about where things go wrong. But there are three opportunities, three relationship types that can result in more sustainable growth where there's going to be less risk of conflict. Leader-follower segments is one that I made brief mention of. Carhartt has a leader-follower relationship between its segments. There are others that I've talked about as well that follow a leader-follower path that can lead to more sustainable growth over time. So there is good news here as well. It's not all doom and gloom. And that's where I will leave you. Thank you very much for your attention. Please ask any questions that you've got, and I would be happy to address them.
And there are some questions.
Great.
I was interested in the Starbucks example there, Ryan. I must admit I gave up drinking Starbucks unless I had to quite some time ago. My kids, though, love their sugar drinks with a touch of coffee in them. So
Yes, exactly. Coffee scented milkshakes. Yeah.
there you go. Purvi asks, while we're looking at examples of companies that failed trying to grow in different ways, I've had a lot of companies that went out of business because they reimagined, so they remained stagnant.
Yeah.
Is there a happy solution? So stagnant or growth and get it wrong?
Yes. So as I mentioned, let me take a step back first. There's lots of things that can go wrong with growth. Um, we're focused narrowly on the customer part of it, right? Because I think that's a complex enough problem that we're going to focus on. So there are also examples where things go wrong in other ways. So you could have operational problems with growth. That can also really screw you up. Not an operations guy. I have no advice to give you other than don't mess that up. But assuming that we've done everything else right, yeah, on the last slide I get to there is positive news here. So again, I only had a half an hour, so I focused on what I think is the most fun part of this, which
Mhm.
is the conflict. And I think it's common, but it doesn't have to be. There are ways that you can manage these relationships. The hierarchical one is one of the ways of doing it. Maintaining separate communities. Like I said, Nike, by maintaining those separate communities, grew like crazy for decades. They were just masterful at creating enough separation that each of these communities felt cared for by the brand, and nobody stepped on each other's toes. So yeah, there absolutely is opportunities here. It doesn't have to be bad. It doesn't always go wrong. Some brands do it accidentally. We're hoping that by creating a more systematic way of thinking about this, that more brands will be able to do it deliberatively. But yeah, there's absolutely positive paths forward. Can I
Good.
jump in and answer a question that I saw pop up real quickly?
Absolutely.
This
Of
is a
course you
short
can.
one.
Yep.
Somebody, let me see, Wayne asked if there are business-to-business examples, and it's a great question. Um, we have a couple in the book that we talk through. One really sexy one about industrial silicon. So you look forward to that. The book mostly focuses on B2C examples, mostly because those are more digestible. So everybody knows kind of what Starbucks is. Everybody knows what we have a case about Apple Final Cut Pro video editing software. Everybody kind of knows what that is. When we get into B2B examples, there's usually a lot more heavy lifting in terms of explaining the industry and explaining the competition. So we do include a couple. It's mostly B2C, mostly for digestion reasons. The general principles, we will argue, do apply to B2B. So there might be different emphases. Maybe there's less danger in a B2B setting for user identity conflict. Although even there, I would argue it's not zero, but it's probably less important than if you're marketing to teenagers, for example. But yeah, the general framework we adhere to. I will also say we are looking for more B2B examples. So if anyone on this chat has a B2B story that they think fits into this general framework, I would love to talk to you about it. So reach out, send me an email. So,
Yeah, I think that's really, there were a couple of people that asked about the B2B question, and I just know from our work in executive
yes.
education, that's really that sort of the B2B to Z to, is critically important for the growth of those organizations. Gerardo just asked, how can you get your corporation aware of their changes when they're not working? There is a huge disconnect between the board and the employees, which many times are the same customers. Generally, people won't speak out of fear of being blacklisted.
Yeah. So that's outside of the scope of the book. That's a general kind of career management, internal
Mhm.
communications. I'll speak briefly to that. I mean, it's a problem, and it's a common problem. My general advice is to do what you can to align incentives. So a lot of times when people don't agree or aren't listening, It's because they want different things fundamentally. So if you want to communicate problems within an organization and you know that you've got people on the other side who kind of don't want to change and don't want to listen, is there a way that you can communicate that such that they see how it is in their interest to make changes? So this could be from a corporate perspective, like your division is not going to do as well if you continue what you're doing. Can be from a personal perspective, like if you want to advance your career, this is the path to do it. Um, but yeah, can you get your motivation on board, align those incentives, and then also make sure everyone is speaking the same language. There's a lot of times when fundamental disagreements occur because we're thinking about similar words or ideas in very different ways. One of the things that I usually do on a lot of my consulting engagements is I will just ask people to define what they mean by things. So like, oh, we want to improve our customer experience. Well, what does it mean to you um, that people have a positive customer experience, or how do you define your target segment? If you go around the room and ask people that, you usually get a bunch of different answers. This, by the way, also very smart for you consultants out there. I ask that simple question. I don't need to say anything. I look like a genius because the information emerges from them that they're not aligned on this. So those are my two things: align communication and align incentives. It's still really hard. Gerardo, you're right. That's a tough thing.
I love that advice. Words, they're so important, and yet we trip over them because the meaning is can be so very, very different for different people. Tammy asks, how do you keep the traditional customer segments engaged during a change or expansion? Are there any advice there as you're growing and expanding? How do you keep your traditional base intact and happy?
Yeah, great question. There's nothing wrong with abandoning your traditional customers if that is part of your plan. Where it becomes a problem is when firms just assume that they're going to keep their customers. It doesn't matter what we do. We're gonna just, they're our customers now, they're gonna be our customers going forward. And I think that that's a pretty pervasive bias where the new customers are the shiny object. And so we're gonna do whatever we need to go after them. And then we don't even think about it. Like it's just, yeah, we'll assume. Um, Going back to Ron Johnson when he took over J.C. Penney, um, you can listen to his statements there, and he was fully engaged in getting those new customers. And he said nothing about keeping the current customers. It was not, it appears it was not even part of his thought process. So what can you do to keep the current customers if that's vital to your interests? You need to pull them into the decision making for everything you're going to do. Well, let's introduce this new product line because that'll attract these new customers. All right, hold on. What would our current customers think about that new product line? Maybe they won't care. That's great. Do it. But maybe, like Land's End, people are going to start to wonder what does our brand stand for if we start introducing these new products. If you run up against enough of those hiccups where it's like, well, wait a minute, I'm not sure our current customers would like this, maybe you need to abandon that new segment. Maybe that segment is just so misaligned, it's not going to work. Go find a different segment that is less in conflict with the segment you're going after. But yeah, if keeping your current customers is an important part of your strategy, and it doesn't always have to be, but if it is, privilege those customers in your decision making. Keep pulling them into the conversation. Keep asking what is important to them.
And you raise another question, Ryan. So when you're going after a new customer segment, presumably you need to understand what your sort of values are as an organization and ensure that the new customer segment can be aligned with those values, that
Yes.
it's not so out there. It might be attractive in terms of size, but it's not so out there that you can't make value statements as the CEO or a C-suite board or whatever. You can't make about the same value statements to this segment as that segment. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So again, there's nothing wrong with changing your values or your brand image if that's what you want to do. So it's entirely possible to go in this new direction.
Mhm.
make sure that that is a deliberate choice and that you've thought through all of the implications of that. Where brands sometimes get tripped up is when they're communicating in different ways, in conflicting ways, to different segments of the market. So one of the biggest marketing stories of the last 10 or 15 years was Bud Light's hiring of a trans influencer as a spokesperson, and then just the huge blow up that happened after that.
Mhm.
They market share was down like 20%. They were the number one selling beer in the US for 20 years, and then all of a sudden they weren't. It was a big deal. I think for a long time now, internal to Bud Light, they were shocked at this response because they'd been sponsoring pride parades for like 25 years at that point. And so internally, they thought, oh, this is just the next logical step in what we've been doing. What they failed to realize is that they were largely communicating in two different ways to two different segments that they were serving, and those messages weren't bleeding over very much. You wouldn't
Mhm.
know that Bud Light was sponsoring a pride parade unless you went to a pride parade, more or less. And if you were there, you were probably on board with the message. And so what happened with the trans influencer, Dylan Mulvaney, is that message bled through. So they were talking to one group in a very progressive way, saying like, we're young and hip and cool, and we have these progressive values. And they were largely talking to their more mainstream customers in a much more conservative way, much more kind of Americana, old school American values. And then all of a sudden, these two segments came into conflict because of message bleed over. It used to be that you could talk to different segments independently with much less risk, but in an age of social media, you can't
Yeah.
rely on that. So yeah,
Right.
you need to make these decisions about who to target, anticipating that if they want very different things, you can't just pretend you're two different brands for these, because that message will bleed over and get out at some point in ways that you might have been able to get away with 20 years ago.
Which means I think that any organization with multiple segments should be thinking about, do I have fences? Am I are they intact, or will social media pull them down? Is that
Yes, yeah, and part of that is dependent on defining your segments well. So we've got a whole section in the book on this. I'm not going to do it justice in 30 seconds, but a lot of firms define their segments in largely demographic terms, and that's a bad way to uh, figure out that's a bad way to anticipate conflict. What you need to get down to is like, what do these people really want? What do they need? What do they value? What's important to them? Because if you define your segments, if you understand them in that way, it's going to be much easier to anticipate where those conflicts will arise. If it's just like,
Mhm.
oh, we're targeting, millennial women, well, like, how could you possibly anticipate conflicts among millennial women with some other group of people? Because
Right.
you don't really know what millennial women care about in any meaningful way. You need to get down to a point where your segments are defined in such a way that you really understand them and we know what is important to them, even sometimes outside of what the product is doing, even
Mhm.
sometimes around ideology. And that'll dramatically reduce your risks if you understand your customers in that way.
Got time for one more question. And
Right?
Gerardo says, are there any other metrics to know if your new direction is working besides, profit? It
Hmm.
seems many companies wait too long to realize whether something's working, and then pivot and lose market share.
That's a great question. We do have a chapter in the book where we give kind of a tool for anticipating where things can go wrong before we get to the point where it's blown up or where we've rolled the dice and found out that we're profitable. Uh, some of it is more kind of conceptual or qualitative, where we're needing to project out and anticipate how these different segments work. But we do have a process for doing that so that, again, hopefully we can understand before months have passed and we realize that we were profitable or we were really not.
Mhm.
Uh, so that we can kind of reduce some of that risk ahead of time. So yeah, there is some of that in the book.
Well, can't wait to get a copy of it, Ryan. Thank you so much for the conversation this morning, and it's been really insightful. So I'm going to hand over to Gavita to close us out. Many thanks.
Thank you, Ryan. Your message about, bleeding over messaging and communication across customer segments, that was a big learning moment for me. We knew that was happening, but thank you for articulating that. All right, so looking ahead with Business Over Breakfast, we have a session on leveraging a startup mindset on June 5th. The university will be observing June 19th, Juneteenth, and 4th of July holidays. So we'll take a bit of a break and then see you guys again in middle of July. Also ahead with Emory Executive Education, we have a few courses coming up with Executive Coaching Program. It's a virtual program that starts this July. You still have time to sign up, so please reach out. We also have MBA level courses this fall, specifically on marketing. If that's your topic and you're really excited about what you learned today, there's more coming this fall. There's about 4 courses that you can enroll in, so please check those out. We also have asynchronous online programs running this summer on digital transformation, AI, and analytics. So hopefully you guys take a look at that. And we want to close with congratulating our 2025 graduates. Thank you and have a great day.